Hello, everybody, and welcome to International Broadcast Media Monday. Today, we're going to have a very exciting topic with a really great panel. First of all, I'd like to introduce our author of the day, the co-author of The Millionaire Next Door, and also Richard Then a Millionaire. Let's bring in the Honorable Bill Danko. Bill Danko, welcome back. Okay. And from South Dakota, we have, actually lives in Salt Lake now, he was a former associate dean of the law school at the University of South Dakota, still practices law in the Salt Lake City area. Let's bring in Dr. Dan Worthington. Dr. Dan Worthington, welcome to the show. Okay. Now we're going to bring in some of our media tycoons. This gentleman is actually the CEO of the Esports Network. Let's bring in Mark Themig. Mark, welcome to the show.
Great to be here. Thank you.
Yes. And then, last but not least, the founder of Good News Planet, who I've known for now many years, and also works very heavily with the United Nations. Let's bring in Paul Flatkus. Paul, welcome to the show. Okay. Yeah, your own fan club. And now, the topic we're going to introduce today is truth in media and truth in advertising. And here's the issue, which you guys will love this one. In advertising, we have a law called truth in advertising. In other words, you can't just advertise, well, I have this pill that will cure cancer, and put an ad on and put it through the television network, and frankly, any form of media, because you get sued for false advertising, otherwise known as truth in advertising. It's been around for a long time, managed by the Federal Trade Commission. Now let's go to the media today. The media has a whole different cat. First of all, there's circular, or I call it circular 230. It's actually regulation 230, which exempts the media from being held liable for false statements made on channels. So Facebook gets a pass, so does LinkedIn, so does everybody else. The problem is today that if somebody purports a false statement on our media, it's considered okay, no liability. That's kind of like the way it goes. Totally different than advertising, or even if you're in the securities business, you get disbarred. If you're a lawyer, you get thrown out of securities if you're hyping a stock and you're saying false statement. So I guess I'll start with Bill, because you wrote the book, The Millionaire Next Door and Richer Than a Millionaire. What are your thoughts about the truth in advertising versus the truth in the media?
Yeah, it's really more strict in the licensed businesses, isn't it? I mean, when I do presentations with insurance companies and I have a slideshow, all the slides say not for public distribution, it's for internal use only. They don't want to have any statement that I make associated with them externally until it's gone through compliance. And I understand that. It's a regulated industry. However, when you make presentations to, I don't know, not-for-profit organizations or just public consumption, maybe as a keynote speaker someplace, I could say anything I want without any repercussion, I think, unless the audience boos me. But generally, it's not illegal to do what I do.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So you're right. If you do this for a professional group, you have to put all these disclaimers out. And frankly, a lot of my business partners, I can't have on any of the TV shows because of their licensing requirements.
Exactly.
And the thing is, they said, my business partner in Salt Lake goes, well, I can't say anything about stocks, bonds, mutual funds without it being cleared by my broker dealer. So hence, there's no reason for me to be on.
Yeah. But it's even getting, I've left the university a number of years ago, but gee, in the good old days, you could say anything you wanted in the classroom. Now there appears to be the thought police in the classroom, and there's a question about free discourse and open discussion. Mm-hmm. I see it with my colleagues, and they say, my goodness, they just don't like the environment they're seeing nowadays.
Yeah, and it's a problem. I mean, the thing is, and we actually, this show appears on a lot of the freedom of speech websites around the world. So so freedom of speech is a big issue. I mean, these are social media groups that have tens and thousands of people that watch them. So let's go to Dan Worthington. Dan, what are your thoughts about this? The truth in media versus the truth in advertising.
Now, there seems to be a three standards, not just two. One is the standard for professionals, and each profession has different codes of ethics, that kind of thing they have to adhere to, advertising requirements. And then you've got the media, and they're supposed to be regulated by the FCC, but they evidently seem to feel like they have free reign to say whatever they want. All you have to do is just listen to CNN or Fox or any of them, and they don't really identify opinion from fact anymore, and so it's very confusing to the American people, and they get sucked into most anything that they get told, which isn't right.
Mhm.
Now, then you have the Facebook, Google, and the rest of them that are supposed to be subject to, given a special exemption under Circular 230, but they're exercising editorial control over free speech, even though they're supposed to be not liable for false, quote unquote, what they regard as false statements. But those who are involved or in charge of being the thought police for them have a political bias or agenda. So some uh, ideas in the mainstream public discourse are able to be shared, others are not. And so, I mean, where does that leave us? Uh, should Facebook be able to do that? Should Google, Twitter be able to do that? I don't think so. And so I think Circular 230 exemption for them should not be in place if they're allowed to do a selective editorial based on political content they disagree with.
Mhm. Yes. Well, Paul, since you're on the Good News Planet, does that issue ever come up with truth in advertising versus truth in the media? How do you deal with that, or do you even have to deal with that anymore?
Uh-huh. I think and I think I can help speak more initially, or well, I can speak about Good News Planet and my Good News broadcast, so on. But I'd like to actually speak more about CBS and PBS, or about public broadcasting in general. In my understanding, and maybe this is old time since I'm doing this 50 years, that public airwaves, if they have to license them, that the FCC is at least for the public use of UHF, VHF, that kind of concept. Now, you could, in essence, if you weren't happy with CBS as a community, you could protest that. Why are they giving them the license? Because it's a public airwaves in that day. Now, since cable has gone underground and so on, I really don't know what the scenario is as far as who's the decision maker giving licensing to cable companies. I mean, I'm on a web broadcast, internet broadcast, and as far as what can be and what can't be, I mean, we have our own standards and practices, just like CBS had standards and practices, and we'll accept what we accept and what we won't. But it is by far the opinion of the management of our company. So I it's a complicated scenario. Unfortunately, the bigger picture is that people don't understand or aren't taught, and we're not educated. I got a master's degree to help me. I think I've said this a couple of times, that somebody owns a piece of media and they're the boss. Or every newspaper, every radio station, somebody has a perspective of what they think is the truth, even the truth, because the truth is not necessarily the truth for everybody. You go to the museum in Washington, D.C., you'll see 75 papers with the 75 different headlines, and they're all a little bit tweaked a little bit differently. So what does that mean for the same story? Because there's 75 eyes looking at it. So I think we really don't understand communications, and that's part of the concern. Facebook has their thing, Yahoo, New York Times, IBM TV, Good News. Everybody, somebody writes a book. Media is an opinion of the person who is running the show. That's it. What I
Yeah.
think.
Yeah, and Mark, since you're on the Easy Sports Network, don't you have the ability to hype your network in any form or fashion without any form of repercussion? In other words, be the PT Barnum of the sports network, because there's nothing stopping you. It's not regulated like the industries that I work in, where if you wanted to do that, you end up losing all your licenses. What's your thoughts on that? You got to unmute. Let me make sure you're unmuted here.
Here, there we go.
There we go.
Nick, it's a great question. In our case, because we are Reuters' worldwide partner for esports news, we are held at a much higher standard. We hold ourselves at a much higher standard. And I think what's been confusing in this world of news versus commentary and so on is, you take networks like CNN that used to be essentially, at least I thought early on, a hard news station. Now opinion people are in place and commenting, which blurs the line of what's really news and what's an opinion of that individual, opinion of that network. And that blurring is a real problem for a lot of people. The second thing is that when it comes to advertising or people wanting to advertise through our network, we've kind of simplified it by fundamentally saying we're going to follow the same rules and guidelines as Google does or YouTube does. So the things that they find are unacceptable, whether it's firearms or drugs or other things, they have a pretty clear, comprehensive policy as to what it is they'll accept and what they won't accept. And so we simply tell any advertiser, if your product or your message conforms with their rules and regulations, then we're okay with it. We're not going to go outside of it. Now, I think where the issue is sometimes become, what's the responsibility of the advertiser or the network, and where that line is blurred is that it's almost impossible for a network to police every single thing or every word that's being said by an advertiser. And I think that's where that issue comes in. But we follow a pretty strict assessment process. And again, because we're with Reuters, we follow very strict reporting rules in that regard.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the thing is, you're basically self-regulating, it sounds to me, as opposed to not being actually FINRA, which is the Financial Institution Regulatory Authority, is actually an SRO, a self-regulatory organization that people voluntarily join to provide regulation within the financial services industry, which includes a lot of this truth in advertising or truth of what you said, because securities brokers prior to FINRA, and even some today, they would hype up stocks and hype up securities that frankly the truth just wasn't there. The problem that I see also that we have in media that does not exist in securities is that we have freedom of speech issues. So with that, I'll bring in Dr. Dan Worthington, who's also an attorney. What about this? If we started regulating media, wouldn't we run into freedom of speech issues, Dr. Worthington?
All the time. I mean, that's really the whole reason why we are supposed to have a forum, a public forum, is so that we have robust discussion of issues in our forums, right? Newspapers, television, other places. The problem is that political opinion is being strictly controlled, and there's tremendous bias in the media today. So as a result, it isn't fair and balanced, which is required by the FCC regulations, by the way. Everyone just sort of pretends that it is, and it's not. And we all know it isn't. I mean, all you have to do is listen to it to know that every media outlet has their slant. Every network has their slant. Every network has their bias. And to the extent that the bias is creating a problem with getting the news out, the news is supposed to be factual. And back in the old days, I guess, it was more factual. Now it's all freaking opinion. It isn't factual. It's everybody's opinion about this or that, and it's very politically slanted. So, I mean, so the outlets are not doing their job. They're lying their butts off half the time. And it's sort of like this, what we used to say about the politicians. How can you tell if a politician is lying? Well, just watch them move their lips, right? It's the same. That's true with these news outlets now, and it's gotten ridiculous. So that's kind of the problem that I see. And then there's this intimidation. We saw a lot of that, both pre and post election. Intimidation, people making threats and other things, just to gag people from saying things one way or the other. And so it's just been one nightmare for the American people who have the right to know what what ideas are out there, what the discourse is, and where media and the Facebook and Google and Twitter and the rest of them are silencing voices that need to be heard. It creates a problem with not allowing open discourse to be out there and ideas to be discussed. Just because you don't like an idea doesn't mean that you can censor it, right? It's look at the communists. The shoe was on their foot for a long time, and now it seems like the shoe's on the other foot. That the freedom-loving Americans can't talk about things that used to be talked about all the time.
Yeah. Good News Planet. Let's bring in Paul Slatkus on Good News Planet. How do you handle this, or do you just, if somebody has bad news, you just throw them off because you're the Good News Planet? How do you handle the cancel culture?
Well, we have standards and practices. We prefer that no one speaks negatively about anybody else or any product or any service or anything. So you can't say that, I can't say that IBM is not a good TV station, because that would not be right and part of our format. So we just have our standards and practices, just like when I was at CBS TV. But it is my opinion of what is good or what is bad. And I mean, I put what you could consider bad scenarios, but the people that hopefully are usually talking about the positive. I talk about cancer, but I'm talking about the remedies for cancer, or new scientific discoveries, so things like that. So we're pretty open to hear from everybody, and though because of our positive commentary, we want to hear your good news, and not that your good news is that somebody else is not so good.
Yeah. Dr. Danko said you used to teach at university level, and you just made something very interesting, the students, or the pushback, or freedom to speak anymore. Do you see that actually taking place on university campuses, where the freedom of speech is really limited at universities than it used to be?
Yeah, it really is. In fact, there was a recent study in the academic literature about peer-reviewed articles. And the unfortunate problem is that more studies are cited that have never been replicated because they help to promote a particular agenda. Now, you could do a study on anything and get it published somewhere, and the momentum can build then when other like-minded people say, oh, geez, look what this researcher found. Not that it's been ever replicated. They say, I am going to now cite this and get the momentum going and have an agenda rather than a pursuit of the truth. This cancel culture. One of my neighbors in upstate New York is a Nobel Prize winner, and he has written several times in the Wall Street Journal about climate change is not settled science. And the kind of pushback he gets from that, you can imagine. But look, here's a very bright guy who does the science. He's a physicist. And he says, it's not settled. Anytime you say something is settled, it's not science, is it? What we have to do is continually test the hypothesis. And if you support it, great. You can then cite, this is the momentum that supports it. But if you just have a one-off study that happens to have particular political appeal, you can get another momentum going and keep citing something that has never been replicated. Yeah, I think it's a very serious issue on campuses. I mean, look, academia, I've always thought of this. The university is supposed to be the keeper of the truth, right? It's becoming a mockery right now, unfortunately.
Okay, well, we have another person who's been on campus. Let's see, Dr. Worthington, since you were on the University of South Dakota Law School campus, have you seen a change in campus on what is true and what is Memorex?
It's been a while since I've taught on campus or been on campus, so I can only speak anecdotally, right? So what I'm hearing is that there is a significant silencing of conservative voices in the din of the liberal ideology, and that isn't healthy. Some groups are being demonized, the Federalist Society, other groups that are conservative are being demonized, both in the media and other places. Groups that are seeking to expose the problems on the left that are, like, for example, with the abortion clinics and others, they're being demonized as not being factual, as being having an agenda. Well, they do have an agenda. They want to get at the truth of what's happening. Are parts being sold or aren't they being sold? Are people making money or are they not making money? These are things that people want to know in the community, to know if what the motivations of some of these people are. Are they there because they're being altruistic? Well, hell no. And people need to know that, so that proper public policy and our leaders can have the truth as well. I mean, everybody gets spoon-fed whatever they need to get by the lobbyists and other parties in the public, and so we have a lot of corruption publicly and in our public policy decision making and other things. And that's sort of thing that concerns me greatly, because the people that are silenced are really the majority of the American people, and their voices are not being heard, and that is a problem. That's what freedom of speech is supposed to be all about, is so that the American people have a voice and have their views reflected in the various forms of media and other places. Now, before all the censorship, Yahoo and those other areas were allowing people to talk and express their opinions. Now that's not happening. So how are those opinions being shared in the public domain? They aren't, because of all the censorship and the difficulty that's surrounded. Because Google and Facebook and Yahoo and those others, Instagram, whatever, they have a political agenda. They have a political bias, and so what they're doing is silencing voices.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Mark, have you ever seen that in your practice, where you get somebody comes to you and say, "Look, we'd like you to talk about Epic Games and Apple," or "Nope, you can't talk about it"?
I'll tell you the interesting thing, Nick, that I see in esports and gaming is that this, tends to be dominated by younger people, and younger people right now, from what we're seeing, tend to be more leaning to the right than to the left. More leaning to the left as opposed to the right, and be very concerned and be very reactionary to the news they hear, which I think our guests, collective guests here, have said the news we hear is not necessarily, in many cases, especially when it comes to social issues, really independent, unbiased reporting. It is quite frequently either only reporting one side of the story, or reporting the story with that particular station or media, their agenda. So I think that has caused a lot of young people who get a lot of their news off the internet and get a lot of their news from other people to be very really strongly opposed to comments more on the right than they are on the left. And so we really see that bias bias in many young people. And I think that goes back to some of the other conversation about what's going on in the universities. And that's where a lot of that bias is there. And unfortunately, when you ask people real meaningful questions about their views, when you push past their stated view and ask them to articulate why they feel that way, there's nothing there. It's a message they're carrying, but not a message they understand or own or even fully appreciate. It's just stunning to me to see that so often. So those are just some observations I've had here from on the game side.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Just to do some quick introductions, Professor Adam Lamperero has just joined us from Georgia College. He also has a bachelor's degree from the University of Southern California, a law degree from the Ohio State University, a master's in law from New York University, and also a master's in the University of Alabama. For those who just join us on our show, we also have Dr. Dan Worthington, who's a former associate dean of the University of South Dakota School of Law, Mark Theming, who actually is the CEO of the Esports Network, Paul Slatkus, who's the CEO of the Good News Planet, and Dr. William Danko, a former professor also as well, and the co-author of The Millionaire Next Door, 4 million copies being sold. Professor Lamperero, we're discussing truth in advertising versus truth in the media. Truth in advertising, if you advertise certain products and you don't tell the truth, you get hit with complaints from the Federal Trade Commission. You get hit with complaints if you're lying in your securities broker, FINRA. You get disbarred if you're an attorney. Bad things happen. But if you're in media, everything goes. As a matter of fact, Section 230 says no liability. What are your thoughts about lying in the media is okay, but lying elsewhere is not?
My thoughts are that it's very problematic, particularly for democracy. If you look at CNN or if you look at Fox News, you'll hear two different stories on the same set of facts. The media is hopelessly biased, they are agenda-driven, and they give their audiences incomplete information. When you combine that with low information voters, you have a problem with democracy because people are voting or developing opinions on policy matters that aren't fully informed. You also see this in academia, sadly. Professors who have agendas, who seek to indoctrinate their students into a certain ideology rather than providing them with complete information. I think it's very troubling, and I think something needs to be done to rectify this so that we can have truth in media again and a more fully informed citizenry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Professor Danko, you were also discussing apparently a problem that you had, but you've left the university since then, a problem that you see on campuses where if you start talking about certain things and you're a professor, I guess absent tenure, is your job threatened because of freedom of speech today on campuses? Just a minute, I'm going to make sure you're unmuted. Got to hear you, Professor Danko.
No, unfortunately it is. It's disturbing. Adam makes the valid point here. Now, look what's happened as a culture. We've gotten away from some of the basic ideas that should guide a society. How about the 10 Commandments? How about the commandment, thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor? Well, people say, well, look, don't tell me about the commandments. Don't tell me about some of these larger truths. I'm just going to do what I want to do, irrespective of the consequences. What a mess we have created. We got away from some of the basic tenets that have guided our society and a culture, a Western society. Look, anybody who's taken a research methods course, I used to teach marketing research, and research methods, we always say, okay, what is the hypothesis we want to test, and what are some alternative explanations for the phenomena we're trying to measure? If you're really honest in your research, you're going to go where the science takes you, where the statistical analysis takes you. And if it happens to be counter to the agenda, so be it. Look, in marketing research, in developing markets, we always talk about market segments, where we have to look at, is there a cultural difference in how people behave? Is it based on gender? Well, is it based on race? But once you start getting into some of these areas of, your culture and your race and your age and your gender, you're really going to open a can of worms with somebody saying, well, that is so discriminatory. How can you say certain elements in society react differently or should be treated differently? But that's what market segmentation is all about, isn't it? Isn't
Yeah.
But to that point, medical research, you better darn well look at gender differences and race differences and just genetic differences that make you what you are, and how a drug might differ in reaction. So look, I like to think that medicine has the highest standard of what ought to be done, but unfortunately, that even gets politicized. I mean, there's been scandals in the medical literature where the researcher in the hard sciences says, I'm not going to get funded unless I get some research that's going to be agreeable to my sponsor. And of course, now they have disclosures saying, the following companies have supported this particular research agenda that I'm engaged in.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's troubling. It is troubling.
Right. Paul, your thoughts? You got to unmute yourself, Paul.
I was saying there's a lot of wisdom being stated here, and good knowledge about observations about media overall in general. One thought that comes to me first is media in general, is that, and I think we're sort of like, I'm giving advertising a big break here, but like everybody who gets into some car looks better than anything you've ever seen, if that's what you want to see in your life. And they don't look like that in a normal way, or other kinds of products. I mean, models and clothing. I mean, the whole ad business, I think there's a lot of psychology that goes into an ad. And maybe at the end of these are not real people. What are we going to say at the end? These are real people that are made up to be, superstars in certain respects.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think that's a concern. But overall, once again, I was just going to say, The Little Prince and Saint Exupéry's book said, "Only with thine own heart can I see rightly." So, I think there's not enough emphasis in understanding of communications and understanding of media, that it's an opinion, that there's an art director that sets fall down and blah, 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 blah. And it's a newspaper with people doing it. We just don't understand media, I think, in general. We're not taught about it fully. And then we just pick up a paper and we read it and we think it's factual, or watch television and we think it's factual. It's coming into our house. It's someone's allowing it in. So, I should look like, Robert Redford. I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, Nick, I was just going to mention a friend of mine who was a real researcher once told me that truth is what you arrive at when you stop asking questions.
Yeah. Well, what I've seen also in the media, at least because I watch CBS in the morning, they actually have an agenda-driven conversation. In other words, they may be telling the truth, but it's the same agenda over and over again by CBS. And you can tell it's an agenda-driven conversation, but they don't tell anybody that. But you can watch. I can say, well, the number one thing that's going to bleed will be, if there's anybody who died, they're going to bring that on. In other words, bleed it leads. Then number two, it's going to be a race conversation. I guarantee you they're going to be talking about race issues tomorrow on CBS News. They'll be talking about tonight on CBS News. It's a race-driven program. Then if you go to CNN, they have all their different programs dealing on certain agendas that are basically whatever the left comes up with. But is there any real problem with that? In other words, is there anything wrong, and I'll ask Professor Worthington, for a news media outlet to be agenda-driven if they tell the truth? In other words, they're going to feed you this pumpkin pie no matter what you ask for, but at least it's a pumpkin pie, Professor Worthington.
Yeah, but it's not the truth because it's not fair and balanced. It's agenda-driven, and it's got a bias and a slant. It's not the truth. and it's being sold as if it were the truth, and that doesn't give people a fair and balanced view of what the facts really are. It doesn't give all sides. I mean, I've listened to BBC and even RET, some of the other foreign news agencies. They seem to be less biased than ours are. It's weird that
That's
we
true.
can't get our act together in this country, and we're teaching a bunch of journalists and reporters and others to go after these dogged stories and then twist the hell out of them and make them something they're really not, and try to demonize people. And I mean, it's just pathetic what's happened, because of it's all about the dollars, it's all about the advertising, it's all about uh, you know who we can get elected that will uh, push our agenda, who is paying us to do this and that, who are our investors. I imagine if we look behind the curtain, sort of like the Wizard of Oz, we're going to find that a lot of those media outlets are foreign controlled and have foreign investors, and it will not be a happy moment when that particular emperor loses his clothes and people really know what's going on. Because I've done some of that, and it's really kind of interesting to see who controls the New York Times and who controls some of the networks and others, and who's pushing some of these agendas, and all the talking points, are being generated by the political organizations and others, and the media is just picking up, being lazy, and just repeating it. It's just wrong that they're doing that. Fox does it on one side,
Mhm.
CNN does on the other side, until they get threatened with a lawsuit by whoever, and then they back off a little bit, or they censor someone, or they do this and that or that. But I mean,
Mhm.
some politicians get away with, you know, uh, doing whatever they want to do, and then others get nailed to the wall. I mean, look at the New York situation. I mean, you don't have to go very far to see examples of hypocrisy on the left and the right, and the rule of law not being held to a specific standard for either side. It's being used to control people, control their opinions, control their politics, and control the agenda. I guess it depends on which crime syndicate's in charge in the White House, right? Is it going to be the Biden crime syndicate, the Clinton crime syndicate, the Bush crime syndicate, or the Trump crime syndicate? I mean, it really is about crime syndicates anymore, and they're all corrupt. And it's just really pathetic. The American people deserve better.
Yes, Professor Lamparero, you have to deal with this as these students are fed garbage after garbage after garbage. Now all of a sudden they come into your class. How do you handle that? And then the administration, which really gets me on the other side, that has a cancel culture attitude. How can you maintain yourself as a professor and be sane at the same time today, counselor?
Well, the legal academy, I guess you would. I'm construed as conservative, and in a very liberal environment, and that doesn't stop me from voicing my opinions in law review articles and interviews and the like. What I tell my students on the first day of every class is that all opinions are welcome, liberal, conservative, whatever. And the reason I do that is because I want to develop the students' critical thinking skills by allowing them to consider a variety of perspectives and then develop their own opinions. I don't impose my views on them. And you know what? They rely upon me to provide them with information that's going to allow them to develop those skills and to form their own opinions. Likewise, people rely on the media, especially young people. But what you see from networks like CNN is an agenda-driven approach that omits facts and deliberately misleads. You see that on police brutality cases where CNN will foment racial division, but then ultimately you see, for example, an arrest video and you say, wow, obviously the suspect was resisting arrest and police force was justified. You saw that with the Russia investigation. You saw that with Donald Trump, the hatred and the vitriol directed at him in no balanced way whatsoever, without any consideration of diverse perspectives. And you're also seeing it now on social media, where Twitter, Facebook, they're censoring people on the basis of ideology. It's wrong, it's anti-democratic, and it's against our fundamental values as a country.
That's perfect for us when we beam on the free speech networks around the world. Paul, what are your thoughts? You're trying to do Good News Planet. You're trying to do Good News Planet, but what's winning in the ratings is bad news, racial divide, and hatred. How do you compete against the with a good news planet with a bad news world, which people are eating up the bad news and spitting out the good news?
Well, one, I'm not looking to compete. I'm looking to collaborate. Ted Turner, CNN, started with a good news broadcast, and I don't know if you know or read over his books, and then he got on the air and needed $35,000 to keep his broadcasting going. He's done Goodwill Games, a lot of positive energy from that man. Me, I'm not. I do what I do. I have a mission of my own personal life, and that's what I wanted to say is that I think that all media, every media, almost everybody should have a disclaimer that says this is the opinion of the management of Good News Broadcast or whatever. I think we need a big disclaimer on television or some mark that said this is an opinion of the ownership of this media. And that's it. We should all, so you have a decision. If you care to hear the words or the mindset of that media, then you tune in. But at least you know that you recognize that somebody owns this, someone's making a living from this, and someone has an opinion of what should be on the air. Just like CBS decides they're going to have XYZ show on, that's a producer, and it's a meeting, and it's a discussion, and blah, blah, blah. It's a business, show business.
Can I say one
Yeah, go on, Adam.
Well, I just want to say that the people who claim to be for diversity, tolerance, and inclusion are precisely the opposite. They are the discriminators. They are the biased ones. And it's incumbent upon our young people to do their own independent research and inquiry to find out what the truth is. There's too much reliance on social media and media for information, and it's really destructive to our democracy and to an informed citizenry.
Very, very good. Professor Danko, you wrote the book Richer Than a Millionaire, trying to get people to engage in more altruistic behavior. But don't you have a problem that the greed factor, in other words, the millionaire next door, greed is the root of all good, move toward making the money? Isn't that hard to compete with? That if you wrote a book, greed is the root of all good, that may be the next $1 million seller as opposed to Richer Than a Millionaire. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah. No, you're right. We have a very. I don't think I could have written or co-authored, I should say, the Richer Than a Millionaire earlier in my career. I can now afford to do it, so I can do what I want to do. And I deal with a lot of not-for-profit organizations now, and I really, literally, just give my wisdom away, to people I like. So yeah, you're right. I really can't see going to a major financial house and telling them that now what your customers or your clients should do is just give it away. Well, I know it's the right thing to do, but it's something that many people reject. Say, wait a minute, I'm not going to just give it away. I worked all my life to do it. I know it's the right thing to do. Give it away.
Mm-hmm.
But I
Right.
couldn't have done this earlier in my career. But you're right. I guess it comes to a point where it may be like Paul. You're doing what you want to do because you want to do it this way, and I'm doing it this way because that's the way I want to do it, and I want to, share these, my thoughts and my values of my children and especially my grandchildren, saying it's this is what I'm trying to do.
Yeah.
And if we don't do it, who will?
Yeah, that's a good question. Dr. Dan Worthington, what are your thoughts about giving away good news like the Good News Planet? Dr. Danko is giving altruistic behavior as opposed to the old news, or the news that tends to drive people is bleed it leads, and greed is the root of all good. What are your thoughts on that? All these good people, are they going to go anywhere? Is the media just going to destroy them because of the bad news networks which are on, or the agenda-driven networks?
Well, I've worked in philanthropic work for the last 30 years, and it's very, very, very important. I agree. There are ways to give it away responsibly by using it as a tool to educate future generations and create a connection between wealth and responsibility. That's what I'm in favor of. I've seen too many institutionally driven charities that are just irresponsible with money and are not held accountable unless there's some mechanism to hold them accountable for the money and how they use it. And so I do like family foundations and supporting organizations and other structures that hold the charities' feet to the fire, and also let the family to team up in the community and with other charities to do good work and to teach the kids a little something about, and family members a little about mobilizing community assets to do a good job. I love community foundations and the work that they do a lot of times. But just bare naked giving for giving's sake to is not ever a good idea. It takes it should be more work. You should put more effort into it and create some sort of long-term legacy connection between you and your family to make a big difference in what you're doing. So I believe in empowered giving, giving that makes a difference long term.
Nick,
Yeah.
the other thing that we see is that uh, we've grown, we've got multiple generations living now because we're all living longer. So we've got people who've been through the Depression, people who've been through World War II, people who've been through the Korean War, and many other things. And then we've got a lot of young people who've never experienced war. They weren't a part of the Vietnam War. They weren't a part of the Korean War. They don't have any real hardship experience that they've been through in their lives yet. And their expectations for personal success and wealth often exceed their ability to create that on their own, which I think is driving a political agenda right now, which is take from the rich and give to the poor. And that's, I think, driving a certain amount of what is being talked about here today in terms of agendas in the way news is reported on a lot of levels. I don't know if other people agree with me on that, but I certainly see it to be one of the biggest challenges of all, that we're coming from such different places. And particularly, as I say, young people today, they didn't grow up the way, for example, I did years ago, which is if you want it, you got to earn it. You got to go out and do it. It's not going to get handed to you. And that's why you invested yourself in education and why you invested yourself in a lot of hard work. Now there are a lot of young people who say, well, I need time off. I need relaxation time. I need all these other things. And you, Mr. Employer or Miss Employer, are supposed to provide those things for me so that I can live a comfortable and relaxing life.
Very interesting. Professor Lamparero, do you find this in your students when they come to you? Do they come to you with the attitude? Do they cop an attitude that life is going to be great for them, or do they cop an attitude where I'm here to work hard? Are they here to work hard, or are they here to work the system, or should the system work hard for them? Since you have to deal with these students, I don't have to deal with them.
Right.
What do they come with? What's their attitudes there? I have no clue.
Well, I'll say at Georgia College, I'm lucky to have quality students, but I will say of the young people, they are the worst generation that I've ever seen. Lazy, entitled, and misinformed. And I think when it comes to the media, what we see is a lack of quality. There are so many people, for example, on CNN, when I look at Chris Cuomo and Don Lemon, I think, how did these people ever get in media? Whatever happened to the Walter Cronkites of the world? And when you combine that with educational institutions that are giving students incomplete information and misleading them with empirical data to further an agenda, you are cultivating a citizenry that is going to be misinformed and misled. And that's really tragic. So I think that that's a serious problem. Now, as far as books go, I will say I wrote a couple of books too. I only sold about 27 copies though. So if we could teach me how to sell 4 million copies, I'd be happy. Just want to put that out there.
Okay, that was pretty strong. So Bill, what are you saying? It's we heard the greatest generation. Now hear the worst generation. Lazy, entitled, and misinformed. Okay, that seems to be a pretty strong language from a very light-spoken professor. Um, what are your thoughts, Paul? Are you seeing this next generation to be lazy, entitled, and misinformed?
Well, I I'm a grandpa. My kids work very, very, very hard, and so I don't. And it appears that the friends around them are worker bees as well. So, um, I have concerns in general about our world of media destroying the minds with some of the content or some of the not that I want to pick on it, rap songs that are really not such nice conversations, and other media scenarios of people that are very in my mind derogatory to life affirmation. So I'm more concerned in that regard. I think actually I don't think in general anything ever changes from the caveman. That there's going to be good kids and there's going to be not so good kids, and that's just the way human beings are. There's going to be hard workers, and there's going to be a bully, and everybody's going to be afraid of a bully, and blah blah blah. So I don't think human beings can change, will ever change, because we are what we are, and we should just look for those that are nice to hang out with.
Okay, Professor Danko, yes, do you run into students that are lazy, entitled, and misinformed?
Yeah. Well, yes, there are some, but I blame the parents. Look, here's what happens.
Very true.
In sociology, we talk about social class, or at least we used to teach it this way. And social class is a function of your level of education, how much you make, the neighborhood you live in, and well, what happens is, and especially when we see this in The Millionaire Next Door, there's a lot of very wealthy people who grew up being bug exterminators and owning a Porta-John franchise, and doing some things that are not very elegant. So what happens? These parents who made a lot of money with these blue collar ideas and just had a good work ethic, saying, well, I want the next generation to be a little happier. I'm going to indulge them a little bit. I'm going to subsidize their lifestyle. And this is what happens where you get entitlement. Warren Buffett, I think, really encapsulated this the best. He says, if you're a wealthy parent, the best thing you can do is give your children enough money so that they can do anything, but not so much they can do nothing. So, you don't want to, deprive them totally, but maybe pay their tuition. I don't know, but get them started, but let them fly on their own, which means they're going to have to fail on their own as well on occasion, but let them become their own human being.
Yeah. It's interesting because I remember when I was reading your book a long time ago and I was practicing in South Florida doing estate planning, a lot of the millionaires would come in. They were the millionaire next doors. I asked them, so what'd you do for a living? Oh, I owned a machine shop. And I was going like, what, a machine shop? Or they would own a little factory. We have one person that owns ice machines. They put in, this guy's making millions of dollars. He's putting ice machines in 7-Elevens, like no kidding. In other words, it's ideas and things that they worked in that you would just never think of. They were definitely the millionaire next door, which is one reason I think that book should be required reading of all high school students in the United States, because it's a blueprint really for success for frankly anybody. Dr. Danko, I'm just kind of shocked that they don't require people to read a book like that. What's your thoughts on that? Why is our education system so against fundamental education counseling?
Yeah, maybe it's too practical, right? Look, I want to applaud the guy who developed how to sell sewage sludge from the Milwaukee sewer district and market it even in New York State on a product called Milorganite. And if you look at it, it's refined sludge from the sewage system. And if you can sell crap to New York State from another municipality and make money, they really understand what marketing is all about, don't they?
Yeah. Well, yeah. And the thing is, they know how to become very successful. And I think your book was saying, rather than go to become a MD, own a McDonald's. Okay.
Right.
And now it's interesting that you said that, because I don't know what happened with Mark Zuckerberg's dad, who was a dentist. He said, here's your choice. I will fund a McDonald's franchise for you, or a Harvard education. And Zuckerberg went to Harvard. Then he came back after he dropped out. He said, how about fund Facebook?
Yeah,
So
right.
he used the money that was going into McDonald's to go into Facebook, which obviously he was wildly successful with. And I thought that was quite interesting, because to me, that's what I see out there. There's some fundamental businesses, and we were discussing earlier, even trades that people could get in. That I had scrap metal people. I don't know how that were multimillionaires. I don't know how you make millions of dollars in scrap metal. I would love to know how to do that.
You buy
But
low, sell high. That's
what?
how-
Yeah, I guess so. He bought low and so high. But that's the reason I think the fundamentals of the Millionaire Next Door
Yeah.
need to be taught in our education system. And with that, we are at the hour. So I do want to thank our guests from the Easy Sports Network, from Dr. Dan Worthington, Professor Adam Lamperero, Paul, and of course, Dr. William Danko. And we'll see you next week on Media Monday on the International Business Media Show, IBM TV.